Hey everyone, tonight we journey back to a time and place that history textbooks tend to skip over. A world shrouded in mist and deep ancient woods. Imagine a Europe where the great Gothic cathedrals are rising, where knights in shining armor are a reality, and where the word of the Pope is law, almost everywhere. We're diving into the last pagan stronghold of the continent, medieval Lithuania. You're standing beneath a canopy so thick the midday sun is just a rumor. The air smells of damp earth, pine needles, and something else. Something wild and old. Honestly, with the lack of Wi-Fi and the abundance of bears, you probably wouldn't survive this for a week. Your expensive hiking boots would be a sad joke in these sucking marshes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all tuning in from tonight, so drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground beneath your feet is a soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves, a compost of centuries. You trudge forward, the silence broken only by the snap of a twig under your boot and the distant call of an unfamiliar bird. This isn't just a forest, it's the forest. The locals would call it the Kai, the great forest, an almost unbroken wilderness that blankets this corner of the world. It stretches from the shores of the Baltic Sea, deep into the lands that will one day be Russia, a vast green sea of oak, pine, and birch. To you, it feels like an endless claustrophobic labyrinth. To the people who live here, it's a fortress, a pantry, and a cathedral all in one. The trees are your first clue that you're in a different reality. These aren't the neatly managed woodlands of Western Europe. These are primeval giants, some of them hundreds of years old, their massive trunks scarred by lightning and claw marks. They blot out the sky, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. You see no roads, at least none that you would recognize. There are only winding, muddy tracks that appear and disappear, paths known only to the locals, designed to confuse and swallow invading armies whole. This is a land without sprawling cities of stone. There are no grand universities, no soaring church spires piercing the clouds. Society here is built on a different framework. It's a world of wooden hill forts perched on strategic bluffs, of small villages clustered along rivers, and of isolated farmsteads carved out of the woods. You follow a faint trail of wood smoke and come to a small clearing. The dwellings are made of timber, expertly notched and fitted together, with thatched roofs that seem to grow right out of the earth. The people here are wary. Their faces are weathered, their eyes sharp. They watch you not with overt hostility, but with a deep, cautious appraisal. They are the Balts, a distinct people with their own languages and traditions, the last major group in Europe to resist the tide of Christianity that has swept over the continent. Their world is fundamentally connected to the nature that surrounds them. They don't see the forest as a resource to be exploited, but as a living entity filled with spirits and ancient powers. As you watch a woman skillfully strip bark from a birch tree, you notice a man nearby tending a small, smoky fire. He's not cooking. He's slowly heating rolls of the same bark in a clay pot sealed with mud, a process of slow, oxygen-starved pyrolysis. What drips out is a thick, black, pungent goo, birch tar. This stuff is the duct tape and superglue of the 13th century. It's used to waterproof leather boots to seal the hulls of their shallow riverboats, and as a powerful adhesive to fix iron arrowheads to wooden shafts. It even doubles as a medicinal salve for wounds and skin ailments, a kind of all-purpose gunk that holds their world together. It probably smelled terrible, but when a crusader is charging at you, you're less concerned about the smell of your arrowhead glue and more about whether it holds. The political structure here is as murky and complex as the forest swamps. There is no single king or emperor. Power is decentralized, held by a warrior aristocracy of nobles or dukes, known as kunigai. They rule over their clans and territories from those wooden hill forts you glimpsed earlier. Historians still argue whether this was a loose, squabbling confederation of warlords, constantly fighting amongst themselves, or if there was a more subtle, underlying hierarchy long before a single king emerged to unite them. What is clear is that their disunity makes them vulnerable. They raid each other as often as they raid their neighbors, carrying off cattle, goods, and captives. Yet, when an outside threat appears, they have a remarkable ability to coalesce, to melt into the forests and fight as one. It's a society forged by its environment, resilient, adaptable, and fiercely independent. As you stand at the edge of this small, smoky village, a profound sense of isolation washes over you. There are no church bells to mark the hours, no monks chanting in a distant abbey. There is only the rhythm of the seasons, the whisper of the wind in the pines, and the knowledge that beyond the edge of this vast dark forest, a different world is stirring. A world of iron crosses, papal bulls, and military orders who believe it is their sacred duty to bring the light of Christ to this land, whether it wants it or not. The shadow is gathering, and it is coming for this forgotten realm. That shadow on the edge of the forest has a name. It's the Northern Crusades, and now you see its agents arriving on the shores of the Baltic and along the wide, slow-moving rivers. They come in long ships and heavier cogs, their sails bearing symbols you've never seen before. You watch from the tree line as they disembark. They move with a discipline and purpose that is unsettlingly different from the clan-based skirmishes of the local dukes. These men are a single, unified organism. They wear chainmail and steel helmets that glint even in the weak northern light. Over their armor they wear white mantles, and emblazoned on each is a simple, stark black cross. These are the Knights of the Teutonic Order, and their brethren from the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. They are not here to trade for amber or furs. They are holy warriors, a military monastic order sanctioned by the Pope himself, and they have come to this land to wage a holy war. Their official story begins far from these chilly forests, down in the searing heat of the Holy Land. The Teutonic Order was originally founded in the 1190s at the Siege of Acre, a German-speaking fraternity dedicated to caring for sick and wounded crusaders. They were a hospital service, essentially. But as the Crusader states began to crumble and the prospects in the Levant grew dim, the Order, now a full-fledged military power, needed a new purpose, a new frontier to sanctify with blood and steel. They found it here, in the pagan lands of the Baltic. In 1226, a Polish duke struggling with raids from the pagan Prussians, neighbors and cousins of the Lithuanians, made a fateful invitation. He asked the Teutonic Knights for help, offering them land in exchange for their military services. It was like inviting a wolf to guard the hen house. The knights came, and they never left. Their mission, granted by the Pope, was simple and absolute: convert the heathens or eliminate them. There was no third option. To them, this vast ancient forest you've just been exploring is not a sacred place teeming with life. It is a source of profound darkness, a demonic realm under the sway of Satan. The gods the people worship in their sacred groves are not gods. They are devils and tricksters leading souls to eternal damnation. In the mind of a knight brother, felling a sacred oak that has stood for 500 years is not an act of vandalism, it is an exorcism. Forcing a village to accept baptism at the point of a sword is not coercion. It is an act of supreme mercy, snatching souls from the fires of hell. Historians still argue whether the driving force behind the orders was a genuine, burning piety to save souls from damnation, or if it was a colder, more cynical calculation of conquest, land acquisition, and the creation of their own independent, theocratic state. The truth, as it often is likely a messy combination of both. A mission from God that just so happened to come with some very attractive worldly benefits. You get a closer look at one of these warrior monks. He is a paradox, a man who has taken vows like a cloistered monk, yet whose primary function is to be a state-of-the-art killing machine. He has sworn an oath of poverty, chastity, and obedience. He owns nothing personally. His armor, his sword, his warhorse, they all belong to the order. He isn't allowed personal letters or gifts. A quirky but strict rule forbade them from having their own locked chests to prevent the hoarding of private possessions. Their days are a rigid routine of prayer, 7 times a day, just like in a monastery, interspersed with brutal weapons training, patrols, and the administration of their growing territories. Think of them as the most extreme project managers you've ever met, and the project is mandatory continental conversion, and there are no flexible deadlines. They eat together in silence, listening to scripture. They sleep in communal dormitories. Their lives are stripped of all comfort and personal ambition, focusing their entire being into two channels: devotion to God and the perfection of warfare. The first thing they build isn't a church, it's a castle. And not a castle of wood and earth like the ones you've seen the Lithuanians build. They construct imposing geometric fortresses of brick and stone called Ordensburgen. These castles are alien implants on the landscape. They rise with terrifying speed and efficiency, stark and severe. Their high walls and battlements a declaration of intent. They are permanent. They are bases of operation, strategic anchors from which they can launch their risen or raids, deep into pagan territory. You watch them organize the local labor, sometimes conscripted, sometimes enslaved, to quarry the stone and bake the bricks. They are systematic, they are relentless. From these fortresses they project power, terror, and a new kind of order. The forest, which for so long was a barrier to the outside world, is now being methodically dissected. The arrival of the orders marks the end of Lithuania's isolation. The long, bloody 13th century has begun, and the world of the sacred groves is about to collide with the world of the stone cross. The forgotten archives are about to be written in blood. To understand what is truly at stake, you have to turn your back on the cold, disciplined geometry of the Crusader fortress and walk back into the heart of the Lithuanian world. You push through a curtain of pine branches and find yourself on the edge of a village nestled in a river valley. The air here is thick with the smells of life, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of stone and iron you just left behind. Wood smoke, sharp and pleasant, mixes with the earthy aroma of livestock and the savory smell of roasting meat. The sounds are a chaotic symphony. The rhythmic thud of an axe splitting logs, the chatter of women grinding grain between heavy stones, the squeals of half-naked children chasing a flock of honking geese through the mud. A pack of lean, wolfish-looking dogs eyes you warily before resuming their naps in the sun. This is not a society of rigid lines and silent prayer. It is a vibrant, noisy, and deeply organic world. The fundamental building block of this society is the family, the extended clan known as the Gimine. Loyalty isn't pledged to a distant king or an abstract nation, but to your blood relatives and your local chieftain, the warrior duke who leads from the nearby hill fort. Your identity is your kinship. These bonds, forged by shared blood, shared land, and shared gods, are the glue that holds everything together. It's a world built on personal oaths, reciprocal favors, and the sacred obligation to avenge a slain relative. At the heart of their economy is the forest and the river. They are skilled hunters and trappers, seeking out the prized pelts of beaver, marten, and fox. They are expert beekeepers, tending to hives and hollowed-out logs, as honey is their primary sweetener, and more importantly, the base for their beloved mead. But their most famous export, the treasure that has connected them to the wider world for centuries, is amber. You watch a man carefully polishing a raw, lumpy nodule of it. As he rubs, the fossilized resin warms in his hand, releasing a faint, ancient scent of pine. This is the gold of the north, washed up on the shores of the Baltic after storms. It's been traded along the famous Amber Road for over 1,000 years, finding its way into the workshops of Roman artisans and the burial chambers of Egyptian pharaohs. For the people here, it is far more than a commodity. You see it everywhere, strung into necklaces, carved into protective amulets, often with a prehistoric insect perfectly preserved inside, a tiny life form trapped for millions of years, believed to hold immense spiritual power. Finding a large piece of amber wasn't just getting rich, it was a blessing from the gods. It was like winning the lottery, except instead of a giant check, you got a rock that smelled faintly of pine when you rubbed it. You stoop to enter one of the longhouses. Inside, it's dark and smoky, the air thick but warm. A central hearth, a ring of stones on an earthen floor, provides the only light and heat. There are no windows, only small shutters that are closed tight against the cold. The family's few precious livestock might even share a portion of the dwelling in the depths of winter, their body heat a valuable resource. It's a life lived in close quarters, a life of shared stories around the fire on long, dark nights. You notice a man with a nasty gash on his leg, likely from a hunting accident. A woman isn't praying over him or applying a dusty relic. Instead, she's mashing a handful of bright red berries into a pulp. They're cranberries, harvested from the nearby bogs. She packs the mush into his wound before binding it with clean linen. It's a piece of deeply practical folk medicine. The acidic, antibacterial properties of the cranberries help to cleanse wounds and prevent infection, a surprisingly effective antiseptic discovered through generations of trial and error. This woman's role is central to the life of the household. Historians still argue whether Lithuanian women in this pagan society were viewed as mere property within a patriarchal system, as some Christian chroniclers claimed, or if they held significant practical and spiritual authority, especially in matters of the home healing and kinship. What you see is a clear division of labor, but not necessarily one of subordination. While the men focus on hunting, raiding, and defense, essentially pointy sticks and arguments with the neighbors, the women manage the entire domestic sphere, a world that encompasses everything from farming and food preservation to weaving textiles and raising the next generation. They are the keepers of the medicinal knowledge, the folk songs, and the sacred traditions of the hearth. This entire way of life, with its deep reverence for nature, its tight kinship bonds, and its amber talismans, is precisely what the Crusaders have come to annihilate. They see this not as a culture, but as a lack of one. They see gods in the trees and call it idolatry. They see clan loyalty and call it anarchy. The battle lines are being drawn not just between armies, but between two incompatible visions of the world. Following an elder from the village, you leave the clamor of daily life behind. The path grows narrower, winding deeper into the oldest part of the forest. A different kind of silence settles here, a heavy, listening quiet. The air cools. You've entered a sacred grove, an alcus. This is the Lithuanian cathedral. There are no walls, no roof other than the dense green canopy of ancient oak and linden trees, whose branches intertwine like the vaulted ceilings of a Gothic church. The pillars are the massive, gnarled trunks that have stood here for generations, silent witnesses to the changing seasons and the lives of the people who worship among them. Simple stone altars, blackened by the smoke of countless offerings, stand at the base of the most venerable trees. There is a palpable energy in this place, a sense of being in the presence of something far older and more powerful than yourself. Here, in the green twilight of the alcas, you begin to understand the spiritual world that underpins the society you've witnessed. Theirs is a faith, later known as Romuva, that sees the divine in the world around them. Nature isn't just a collection of resources, it is sacred and alive. The gods are not distant, abstract beings in a faraway heaven. They are present in the crash of thunder, the fertility of the earth, and the rustle of leaves. The chief of this pantheon, a deity whose name is spoken with both reverence and fear, is Perkunus. He is the god of thunder, rain, and the sky. You can easily imagine him as a formidable, bearded figure, riding his chariot across the heavens, hurling lightning bolts at the unjust and the wicked. He is a warrior's god, a divine enforcer of order. He's basically the chairman, CEO, and chief enforcer of the divine pantheon. You don't want to get a strongly worded memo from Perkunus, usually delivered via lightning bolt. Balancing his fierce celestial power is the gentle, life-giving presence of Gemina, the Earth Mother. She is the ground beneath your feet, the source of all life and nourishment. She is the one who makes the crops grow and the forest flourish. Offerings are made to her before planting and after harvesting. A farmer might pour the first drops of a newly brewed batch of ale onto the soil as a gift to her, a gesture of gratitude and respect. While Perkunus commands the heavens, Gemina commands the earth, and human life exists in the dynamic balance between them. Alongside these two are a host of other deities. Lima, the goddess of fate, who weaves the destiny of every newborn child. Sol, the radiant sun goddess, and Dievas, the more remote, primordial sky god. Their world is populated by spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, that inhabit the springs, forests, and stones. In a sheltered hollow between the roots of a colossal oak, you see a small, steady flame. This is the sacred fire, and tending to it is one of the most important religious duties. This responsibility falls to a priestly class, the Vidilos, who are led by a high priest or chief seer, the krivis. The fire you are looking at is perpetual. It is never meant to go out. It is a symbol of the enduring life of the community, a direct link to the divine, a spiritual hearth for the entire tribe. Letting the fire die was a catastrophe, a sign of divine displeasure that could bring famine, plague, or defeat. The priest on duty had what was probably the most stressful job imaginable. It's like being in charge of the company's server. But if it goes down, instead of an angry email from IT, you get a visit from a very disappointed thunder god. The exact structure of this faith is a subject of intense scholarly focus. Historians still argue whether the Romuva faith was a highly organized, centralized religion, with a supreme pontiff like the krivis overseeing a unified doctrine across all the Baltic tribes, or if it was more of a collection of local traditions and cults that shared a common pantheon, with each tribe's priest holding ultimate authority in their own grove. The Christian chroniclers who provide our only written sources were, of course, deeply biased. They were looking for a pagan pope to oppose their own, and may have exaggerated the krivis's power to create a more compelling narrative of a unified heathen church. What is clear is that this faith provided a powerful sense of identity and a spiritual justification for resisting the invaders. When the Teutonic Knights raised their cross, the Lithuanians gathered around their sacred fire. This was not just a war of territory. It was a war of gods, a clash between the stone church and the sacred grove. And for the Lithuanian warrior, dying to protect the Alkas and the lands blessed by Žemyna was the highest honor, ensuring his place among the ancestors who watched over them still. The spiritual fire you witnessed in the sacred grove must be defended by a physical one. You move from the hushed reverence of the Alkas to the edge of a clearing near a wooden hill fort, and the air now rings with the thud of axes, the twang of bowstrings, and the shouts of men. Here, in the shadow of the palisade, the next generation of Lithuanian warriors is being forged. Your eyes settle on a boy of about 15. He is lean and hard, his hands already calloused. There is no soft adolescence for him. He has been training for war since he could walk. His playground was the forest, his toys a miniature bow and a wooden knife. He learned to track a deer and a man with equal skill, to move through the densest undergrowth without a sound, and to read the subtle language of a bent twig or a disturbed patch of moss. This education is a constant, lived experience. Historians still argue whether the martial education of a young Lithuanian noble was a highly formalized process with set drills and masters at arms, or if it was a more organic apprenticeship learned through participation in Hunt's local patrols and the constant low-level skirmishing that defined their world. From what you observe, it seems to be a pragmatic blend of both. There are organized drills, but the most important lessons are absorbed through direct experience. He learns not in a sterile training yard, but in the living classroom of the forest that he will one day be called upon to defend. Central to this education is his relationship with his horse. You watch him now, not on a massive, heavy-boned destrier like the Crusader knights ride, but on a smaller, shaggy, and incredibly resilient horse, a native breed known as the Žemaitukas. This horse is a product of the same environment as the boy. It is nimble, sure-footed, and possesses legendary endurance. It can navigate the treacherous bogs and dense woodlands where a knight as warhorse would flounder and break a leg. The boy rides bareback, guiding the animal with his knees and subtle shifts in his weight, leaving his hands free for the weapon that truly defines Lithuanian warfare, the bow. His target is not a stationary bale of hay. An older warrior gallops ahead, towing a hide target on a long rope. The boy gives chase, his horse's hooves thundering on the turf. He draws, aims, and releases an arrow, then another and another, all at a full gallop. This is the heart of their military doctrine. Fast-moving, lightly armored horse archers. It is a style of fighting more akin to the steppe nomads like the Scythians or Mongols than to the knights of Western Europe. It's hard enough to hit a target when you're standing still. These guys were doing it from a moving platform, on a horse that's probably also having an opinion about the whole situation. It's the ultimate multitasking challenge. Their strategy is not to meet the Crusaders in a head-on, chivalric charge. That would be suicide. Their strength lies in harassment, mobility, and ambush. Later in the day, you see this principle in practice. An experienced warrior leads the boy and his peers into the forest. He shows them how to fell trees to create a hidden barricade, an abatis, across a path. He teaches them to use bird calls as signals to coordinate a surprise attack. They practice melting into the foliage, waiting with perfect stillness until the enemy, another group of trainees, walks into the trap. Then a volley of blunt-tipped arrows, a sudden charge from the flanks, and just as quickly they vanish back into the trees. They are learning to become ghosts, to make the forest itself their greatest ally. Before a boy can be considered a warrior, he must often undergo a solitary trial. You learn that this boy recently returned from He was sent deep into the woods for 3 days and 3 nights with nothing but a knife and the means to make fire. He had to build his own shelter, forage for food, and purify water. He had to evade predators, both animal and human. It was a test not only of his survival skills but of his spirit. He had to prove he could listen to the land, that he understood his place within it. It's the medieval version of an outward-bound course, but with a significantly higher chance of being eaten by a bear. And no granola bars. He returned thinner, quieter, but with a new confidence in his eyes. He had faced the wild and proven himself a part of it. The forest was no longer just his home. It was an extension of his own being. Through this brutal and practical tutelage, he has been transformed. He is a weapon, perfectly honed for the environment in which he lives, his mind as sharp as his axe and his spirit as resilient as the ancient oaks in the sacred grove. The forest has forged the warrior, but a single warrior, no matter how skilled, is just a whisper in the wind. An army of them united under a single banner is a storm. As you move among the hill forts and villages, you begin to hear a name spoken with a mixture of fear and respect. Mindaugas. He is one of the senior dukes from Aukštaitija, the Lithuanian highlands. But there is something different about him. While other chieftains are focused on the next raid or settling an old score with a neighbor, you sense that Mindaugas is playing a much larger, more dangerous game. You see him not in a grand hall, but in a smoky, crowded longhouse, his eyes missing nothing as other dukes argue. He is not the loudest man in the room, but he is the one everyone is watching. He possesses a chilling pragmatism, a mind that sees the entire chaotic chessboard of Baltic politics. The great weakness of the Lithuanians, the flaw that the Teutonic and Livonian orders have exploited with ruthless skill, is their disunity. The Crusaders watch as Lithuanian dukes fight each other over land, influence, and inherited insults, and they happily pick off the divided tribes one by one. They offer alliances to one duke to help him attack another, weakening both in the process. Mindaugas understands this better than anyone. He sees that this fractured world of clan loyalties and petty feuds is a luxury they can no longer afford. The Crusader threat is existential, and it requires a unified response. His solution, however, is not a gentle one of inspiring speeches and cooperative councils. His solution is brutally simple: unity through force. You witness the beginning of his consolidation of power in the 1230s and 40s. It is a grim internal affair. He moves against his rivals with surgical precision. Dukes who refuse to bend the knee are eliminated. Their hill forts are stormed, their lands are seized, and their warriors are absorbed into his own growing army. He uses assassination, exile, and strategic marriages to weave a web of power that slowly, violently, strangles all opposition. This includes his own relatives. In a society where kinship, the gimine, is the most sacred bond, Mindaugas becomes a notorious kinslayer, a crime that horrified many of his contemporaries. He was violating the very foundation of their culture to save it. His campaign slogan wasn't "hope and change." It was more like "join me or become a foundational layer for my new hill fort." It was effective, if not particularly heartwarming. This ruthless ambition creates a host of powerful enemies. Chief among them are his own nephews, Tautvilas and Edivitas, who believe their uncle has stolen their rightful inheritance. They flee, and in a move that demonstrates the messy, desperate politics of the time, they seek help from the very people threatening their homeland, the Livonian order. Suddenly, Mindaugas isn't just fighting a foreign invader. He's fighting a civil war, with his own kin leading a crusader army against him. Historians still argue whether Mindaugas had a long-term vision of a unified Lithuanian kingdom from the beginning, or if he was simply a supremely gifted opportunist reacting to crises and grabbing power wherever he could with the idea of kingship, only emerging later as a tool for survival. Was he a visionary nation builder, or just the most successful warlord in a generation of warlords? The pressure on him becomes immense. He is caught in a strategic vice. To the north, the Livonian order, allied with his rebellious nephews, pushes down into his territory. To the west, the formidable Teutonic Knights continue their relentless war against the Samogitians, threatening to cut Lithuania off from the sea and link up with their Livonian brethren. He's basically stuck in the world's worst group project, where two of the team members are actively trying to conquer him, and the others just remembered they have a blood feud with his cousin. His pagan state, forged in blood and betrayal, seems destined to be crushed before it can truly take shape. Cornered, besieged, and with enemies on all sides, Mindaugas does something truly radical. He looks at the weapon being used against him, the cross, and begins to wonder if he can wield it himself. He can't defeat both orders militarily while also fighting a civil war. He needs to break the coalition against him. He needs a bigger ally. And in the 13th century, there is no bigger ally than the man who sanctions the Crusades in the first place, the Pope in Rome. He hatches a plan, a diplomatic gambit so audacious and cynical that it will change the course of the conflict entirely. Mindaugas the unifier now becomes Mindaugas the diplomat. His battlefield shifts from the muddy tracks of the forest to the shadowy world of secret negotiations and calculated risks. You watch as he dispatches a secret envoy, not to the Teutonic Order, his most powerful and implacable foe, but to their rivals and ostensible allies, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. He knows that while the two orders share a common goal, they are also competitors for land, wealth, and papal favor. He will use this rivalry as a wedge. His offer is as brilliant as it is shocking. He tells the Livonian Grandmaster that he, Mindaugas, the great pagan warlord of Lithuania, is ready to abandon the gods of his ancestors. He will accept Christian baptism. The offer is a masterstroke of political jujitsu. In exchange for this monumental concession, he demands three things. First, the Livonian order must immediately cease all attacks on his lands. Second, they must abandon their alliance with his rebellious nephews, leaving them isolated and powerless. Third, and most importantly, they must act as his sponsors at the papal court and help him secure a royal crown. He doesn't just want to be a baptized duke, another vassal of a German order. He wants to be a king, his sovereignty recognized by the highest authority in Christendom, the Pope himself. For the Livonian order, it's a devil's bargain. Their entire stated purpose is the conversion of heathens. How can they refuse when the most powerful heathen of all is knocking on their door, asking to be let in? To do so would expose their mission as a sham, a mere land grab disguised as piety, so they agree. As part of the deal, Mindaugas even gifts them large swathes of Samogitia, the fiercely independent western lowlands. This was the medieval equivalent of selling someone the Brooklyn Bridge. The Samogitians themselves had certainly not agreed to the sale and were famously resistant to any new management, especially the kind that came with swords and crosses. In 1251, the ceremony takes place. You are there, a silent observer in a crowd of bewildered pagan warriors and triumphant German priests. There is no grand cathedral. The baptism happens at one of Mindaugas's main hill forts. The air still thick with the smell of wood smoke in the old ways. You watch as a bishop sprinkles holy water on the bowed heads of Mindaugas, his wife Morta, and their sons. Mindaugas's face is a stony, unreadable mask. There is no sign of spiritual epiphany, only the cool calculation of a man making a necessary move in a deadly game. Historians still argue whether Mindaugas's conversion was purely a cynical political act, or if there was any element of genuine belief involved. The consensus leans heavily toward pragmatism, although it suggested his wife, Morta, may have embraced the new faith with more sincerity, adding a fascinating human wrinkle to the cold political calculus. 2 years later, the ultimate prize arrives. A delegation from the Pope makes the arduous journey to this remote corner of Christendom, carrying with them a golden crown. You have to feel for the papal legates tasked with delivering it. Your Holiness, the route involves 500 miles of bandit-infested forest, a swamp that eats carts, And our destination is a guy who was sacrificing goats last Tuesday. Are we sure about this? But they arrive, and in the summer of 1253, Mindaugas is crowned the first and only king of Lithuania. In the eyes of Catholic Europe, he is no longer a savage warlord. He is a legitimate monarch, a brother to the kings of Poland, Hungary, and France. The Pope now recognizes Lithuania as a kingdom and forbids the Crusader orders from attacking it. With one audacious move, Mindaugas has shattered the coalition against him. The Livonian order is now a neutral party, bound by the Pope's decree. His nephews, deprived of their Crusader support, are hunted down and defeated. The Teutonic Knights are forced to halt their major campaigns against the core of his kingdom. He has bought his people peace, he has bought them time. But as you look around at the assembled Lithuanian nobles, you see the cost. In their eyes, you see confusion, resentment, and the smoldering anger of betrayal. Their leader has bowed to the god of their enemies. He has given away ancestral lands. The king may have a crown of gold, but he rests uneasily on a throne of suspicion. He has used its complicated relationship status with Christianity to get everyone to leave him alone. A brilliant tactic that guaranteed the next family reunion was going to be incredibly awkward. The decade following Mindaugas' coronation is one of strange and deceptive calm. On the surface, the Kingdom of Lithuania is a new, albeit remote, member of the Christian family of nations. The Pope's decree holds, the major Crusader campaigns against the Lithuanian heartland cease. Mindaugas, the shrewd politician, uses this precious breathing room to his advantage. He strengthens his hold over the Lithuanian dukes, solidifies his borders, and expands his influence eastward into the lands of the Rus, laying the foundations of what will become a vast Grand Duchy. You walk through his kingdom during this period and feel the tension of a dual identity. In his capital, a modest cathedral has been built, a lone stone testament to his new faith. German merchants and Franciscan friars can be seen at his court. But you only have to walk a few miles outside the royal hill fort to find a different reality. Out in the countryside, life continues as it always has. The farmers still leave offerings for Gemina, the Earth Mother. The sacred groves are still tended in secret, the ancient oaks still revered. The baptism of the king was a political arrangement, an umbrella to ward off a storm. But the faith of the common people remained deeply rooted in the soil and the seasons. The Christianity of Lithuania is a thin veneer, a diplomatic fiction that satisfies a distant pope, but has not captured the hearts of the people. The most significant challenge to this fragile peace comes from the one place Mindaugas' authority has never truly reached, the western lowlands of Samogitia. Remember those lands he so generously gifted to the Livonian order? The Samogitians have been fighting a ferocious, non-stop guerrilla war ever since, refusing to be anyone's property. They are the heartland of the pagan resistance, a constant bleeding ulcer on the side of the Crusader state. Their defiance becomes an inspiration. At Mindaugas' own court, a powerful pagan faction begins to coalesce around his nephew, a brilliant and ambitious commander named Treniota. He is the voice of the old ways, the champion of the unyielding warriors who see the king's baptism as a national humiliation. Treniota was that one friend everyone has, the one who's always saying, "See, I told you so," every time something goes wrong with your sensible plan. Except his "I told you so" came with an army of angry pagans. He constantly whispers in the king's ear, pointing to the heroic Samogitian resistance as the true path forward, not this humiliating peace with the men of the cross. Then, in 1260, everything changes. The Samogitians, led by a brilliant chieftain, score a victory so total, so catastrophic for the Crusaders, that it sends shockwaves across all of Europe. At the Battle of Derby, a massive combined army of the Teutonic and Livonian orders is lured into a swampy battlefield and utterly annihilated. The news arrives at Mindaugas' court like a thunderclap from Perkunas himself. The invincible knights have been crushed. Dozens of high-ranking knight brothers lie dead, along with hundreds of their soldiers. In a moment of supreme irony, the native conscripts the knights had forced into their army, the Curonians, had switched sides in the middle of the battle, attacking the Crusaders from the rear in a perfectly timed betrayal. The victory at Derby ignites a firestorm. The oppressed Prussian tribes rise up in a great uprising, and for a time, it seems the entire crusader project in the Baltic might collapse. The political winds have shifted so fast, Mindaugas is getting strategic whiplash. One minute, the cross is a shield. The next, it's a target. He now faces the most critical decision of his life. Does he honor his Christian vows and help the weakened orders suppress the pagan rebellions? Or does he seize the moment, cast off his crown, and lead a pan-Baltic pagan crusade against the Crusaders? Treniota's arguments, once just whispers, are now roars. The time for diplomacy is over. The gods have shown them the way. Historians still argue whether Mindaugas's apostasy was a calculated political pivot, recognizing the shifting balance of power after Durba, or if it was also driven by personal ambition and a genuine desire to return to the traditions of his people. In the end, the choice is clear. In 1261, King Mindaugas of Lithuania commits the great apostasy. He formally renounces the Christian faith, expels the missionaries, and declares war on the orders. The brief 10-year chapter as a Christian kingdom is slammed shut. He sends a message to the Pope, essentially saying, "Thanks for the crown, it was a lovely gesture, but I've decided to go back to my old thunder god. We're registered at the sacred grove." The breakup was not amicable. The war is on again, but this time it is a war of total commitment, led by a unified Lithuania that has tasted the enemy's weakness. With the baptismal waters washed away and the sacred fires rekindled, the war enters a new and brutal phase. The brief, fragile peace is shattered, and the full fury of both the Teutonic and Livonian orders is now directed at the apostate Mindaugas. But the Lithuanians, now united and emboldened, will not meet them on a field of battle chosen by the knights. They will fight on their own terms in their own arena. You are now with a band of Lithuanian warriors, and you are about to receive a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. The greatest weapon in the Lithuanian arsenal is not the bow or the axe, but the land itself. The endless forests, the sucking bogs, the winding, shallow rivers. This landscape that you found so disorienting and hostile is now revealed to be a sophisticated defense system. To the heavily armored Teutonic knight, this is a green hell. His massive warhorse, so devastating in a charge across an open field, struggles in the mud and gets tangled in the thick undergrowth. His heavy armor, which can turn a sword blade, becomes a steel oven in the summer and an anchor if he falls into a river. The Crusader's strength lies in formation, in the disciplined charge of a line of knights. But here, the forest breaks every formation, forcing their long columns to stretch out along narrow, winding paths, making them vulnerable and weak. Their supply wagons get stuck in the mire, and foraging parties that stray too far from the main force simply disappear, picked off by unseen enemies. The forest is not neutral ground. It is an active and malevolent combatant on the Lithuanian side. You watch as they prepare an ambush, the core of their military strategy. It's a deadly form of theater. First, a small, fast-moving group of Lithuanian horsemen will launch a lightning raid on a Crusader outpost, setting fire to a storehouse before making a great show of fleeing in a panic. The knights, incensed and overconfident, mount their horses and give chase. The Crusaders fell for the fake retreat so many times you have to wonder if they ever had a team meeting about it. All right, Ulrich, this time the fleeing pagans are definitely fleeing in terror and not leading us into another bog. Third time's the charm. The fleeing Lithuanians are the bait, and they lead the pursuing knights not on the most direct route home, but along a carefully pre-selected path, one that narrows into a deep wooded ravine or leads directly into a marshy wetland. Once the Crusader column is deep inside the trap, a single piercing bird call echoes through the trees. It's the signal. Suddenly, the silent forest erupts. From the high ground on either side, a storm of arrows and javelins rains down. The knights, unable to see their attackers, raise their shields, their formation thrown into chaos. Then from the rear, the warriors who were supposedly fleeing turn and attack the back of the column. Other fighters, hidden in the foliage, swarm the flanks. A massive tree, partially cut beforehand, is dropped across the path, sealing the exit. It's a perfect kill box. The knights are trapped, their horses screaming and stumbling in the mud, their movements restricted. The lightly armored Lithuanians dart in and out of the trees, striking with axes and spears, and then melting back into the shadows. The battle is over before the knights even understood it had begun. This strategy of avoiding pitched battles was a deliberate choice. Historians still argue whether the Lithuanians' reliance on guerrilla warfare was a deliberate strategic choice based on a sophisticated understanding of their military strengths, or simply a necessity born from their inability to match the Crusaders' heavy cavalry and siege technology in a conventional battle. Whatever the reason, it was brutally effective. At night, they would employ psychological tactics, circling the Crusader camps, mimicking the howls of wolves, and using the forest's strange acoustics to make their numbers seem terrifyingly large. It is hard to get a good night's sleep when you're convinced every owl hoot is a pagan warrior whispering, "I know where you parked your destrier." Morale was not high. When facing a massive invasion, they employed a scorched earth policy. They would burn their own fields and villages, poison the wells, and vanish into the forest with their livestock, leaving behind an empty, smoldering wasteland for the invading army to starve in. It was a strategy of total, desperate commitment, and it meant that every victory was paid for with their own suffering. The guerrilla ambush is the skirmish, the daily bread of the Lithuanian resistance. But sometimes the stakes are raised, and a true battle becomes unavoidable. Now you will witness the culmination of these tactics on a grand scale, the day the foresty-ass ghost came out into the light and dealt a blow that shook the foundations of the Crusader world. We are going back to that pivotal year 1260, the year before Mindaugas's great apostasy. You are in the heart of Samogitia, near a body of water called Lake Derby. A massive Crusader army is on the march. It is a formidable host, a multinational corporation of holy war. There are the elite knight brothers of the Livonian order, led by their Grand Master. There are their powerful allies, the Teutonic Knights, led by their Marshal. They are joined by Danish knights and secular crusaders from Germany, all seeking salvation and glory. And crucially, they have a large rear guard of conscripted native troops, Curonians and Prussians, peoples already conquered by the orders and forced to fight for their new masters. Their mission is to finally crush the Samogitian rebellion, to burn their villages and to build a fortress that will dominate the region. They are confident, marching with banners flying, a river of steel flowing through the green landscape. You are with the Samogitian commander, watching their advance from a wooded hilltop. He has no fear. He has a plan. He allows the Crusader army to march deep into his territory, far from their supply bases. He lets the hot July sun and the swarms of insects do their work, sapping the energy of the men in their heavy mail and woolen tunics. He refuses to give them the open field battle they crave. Instead, his warriors harass their flanks, pick off scouts, and then melt away, drawing the Crusaders further and further into a swampy, unforgiving terrain of his choosing. Finally, the knights can take no more. Impatient and arrogant, they corner the Samogitian force and prepare for battle. The ground is soft and marshy, a terrible place for a cavalry charge. In a fatal miscalculation, the knights decide to dismount and fight on foot, believing their superior discipline and armor will carry the day. This was a tactical decision on par with deciding to learn to swim by tying an anvil to your leg. It did not end well. The battle begins, and it is a brutal, grinding affair. The dismounted knights form a shield wall, a fortress of steel, and the lightly armored Samogitians crash against it. But the knights are slow, weighed down by their armor, sinking into the soft ground. The Samogitians are nimble, using the terrain to their advantage, striking from all sides. The battle hangs in the balance for hours under the sweltering sun. The knights are exhausted, but their line holds. Then the turning point. The Curonian conscripts, who were supposed to be guarding the Crusaders' rear, make their move. They do not join the fight. They do not flee. They do something far worse. They abandon their posts, circle around to a nearby hill, and launch a full-scale attack on the Crusaders' camp, slaughtering their squires and servants and seizing their panicked horses. It is a betrayal of stunning proportions. Historians still argue whether the Curonians' betrayal was a spontaneous act of opportunism, seeing their hated masters in trouble, or a pre-planned part of the Samogitian strategy, coordinated through secret communication before the battle even began. For the knights bogged down in the swamp, the sight of their own rearguard attacking their camp is a vision of doom. Their escape route is gone, their morale shatters, panic rips through the disciplined ranks, The shield wall breaks apart, and the battle turns into a rout, a desperate, chaotic struggle for survival. The Samogitians surge forward, and the rout becomes a massacre. When the bloody work is done, the scale of the victory is staggering. The Livonian Grand Master lies dead in the mud. The Prussian Marshal of the Teutonic Order is dead. 150 Knight Brothers, the elite of both orders, have been slain. The orders lost so much of their senior management in one afternoon, they probably had to promote squires directly to Vice President of Holy War. The quarterly report back to the Pope must have been a work of fiction. This was the greatest defeat the crusading orders had suffered in a century. The news ignited the Great Prussian Uprising and, as you know, gave Mindaugas the final push he needed to cast off his crown and rejoin the fight. Derby proved that the pagan warriors of the forest were not just a nuisance to be swept aside. They were an existential threat to the Crusaders' entire project. You stand on the now quiet field of Derby, the ghosts of the slain knights silent beneath the marsh grass. The question hangs in the air. Who are these people, the Samogitians, who could so utterly humiliate the combined might of the crusading orders? To understand them, you must journey deeper into their homeland, a region known in their tongue as Žemaitija, the lowlands. This is the defiant pagan heart of Lithuania, and the perennial, agonizing thorn in the Crusaders' side. The landscape itself gives you the first clue to their character. While the rest of Lithuania has its share of forests and swamps, Samogitia is this principle taken to the extreme. It is a labyrinth of impossibly dense forests, vast and treacherous bogs, and a confusing web of small rivers and lakes. It is a land that is naturally hostile to outsiders, a place where an invading army can be swallowed whole without a trace. This geography has shaped the people who live here. The Samogitians are, even by Lithuanian standards, a deeply conservative and fiercely independent people. You sense it in the way they carry themselves, a stubborn pride and a profound attachment to their ancestral lands and traditions. Asking a Samogitian to convert was like asking a cat to enjoy a bath. It was met with immediate, profound, and often violent disagreement. They were not interested in new ideas, especially from guys in scary helmets. While Mindaugas in the East was playing the grand game of European politics, accepting baptism for a crown, the Samogitians saw only one path: resistance. To them, compromise was just a slower form of surrender. They were the guardians of the old ways, and their sacred groves were the most revered, their pagan faith the most fervent in all the Baltic lands. This stubborn adherence to their faith had profound historical consequences. The Samogitians would be the very last people in all of Europe to officially abandon their pagan beliefs, holding out until the early 15th century. For decades, they existed as a pagan society inside a notionally Christian Lithuanian state, a pocket of the old world stubbornly refusing to die. Their strategic position made their resistance absolutely critical. Look at a map. Samogitia is the land bridge that separates the Teutonic Knights in Prussia from their Livonian brethren to the north. For the orders, conquering this territory was their #1 strategic objective. Uniting their two states would allow them to bring their full, combined force against the rest of Lithuania. For the Lithuanians, holding Samogitia was paramount to keeping their enemies divided. This small patch of boggy lowland was the cork in the bottle, the single point of failure for the entire Crusader strategy. This is why the fighting here, year after year, decade after decade, was the most brutal and relentless of the entire two-century conflict. Their political structure was as wild and resilient as their landscape. Historians still argue whether Samogitia was a unified political entity under a single duke or a loose confederation of powerful local clans who only united in the face of a common enemy, which might explain their unpredictable, decentralized, and highly effective resistance. Whatever the case, they were a people defined by their warrior culture. A powerful symbol you see here is the bear, a sacred animal representing their strength and untamable spirit. You see it carved into the gate of a hill fort, a warrior with a bear claw necklace, a raw expression of their identity. To live in Samogitia was to live in a permanent war zone. Every man was a soldier, every hill a potential fortress. The three most important words in Samogitian real estate were moat, moat, and moat. And a good, clear escape route into a swamp only a local could navigate. This constant existential pressure forged them into the most hardened and effective fighters in the region. They were the engine of the pagan cause. Time and again, when the Grand Duke in the capital city of Vilnius would agree to a truce with the order, often ceding Samogitian territory on paper to achieve peace, the Samogitians would simply ignore the treaty and keep fighting. Their constant, unauthorized warfare would inevitably shatter the peace, dragging the entire Grand Duchy back into conflict. The Samogitian diplomatic pouch usually just contained a single, very sharp axe and a note that said, "No." They kept communications brief. They were an unruly, defiant, and invaluable part of the Lithuanian state, the eternal flame of pagan resistance that could never be extinguished. Decades have passed since the apostasy of Mindaugas. The war has become a grinding, brutal constant, a dark rhythm of raid and counter-raid. The fierce resistance of the Samogitians has kept the Crusaders at bay, but it is a war of attrition, and a state cannot be built on defense alone. You travel eastward to the growing political center of the Grand Duchy, the nascent city of Vilnius. Here in the early 14th century, you find a new kind of leader on the Lithuanian stage. His name is Gediminas. He is not a king. That title vanished with Mindaugas. But he is the Grand Duke, and he rules with a vision that extends far beyond the next battle. You see him in his hall, a formidable warrior, yes, but one who spends as much time with scribes as he does with his generals. He understands that the endless war with the Teutonic Order cannot be won by swords alone. He is about to open a new front, a war of words and ideas. Gediminas' great innovation was to stop talking to the Teutonic Knights and start talking about them to the rest of Europe. You watch as he dictates a series of letters to Franciscan friars, men of the Christian faith who, in a stunning display of pragmatism, serve as the pagan duke's personal secretariat. These letters, written in flawless Latin, are not addressed to the Knights Grand Master. They are addressed to Pope John XXIII in Avignon and to the powerful merchant cities of the Hanseatic League, Lübeck, Hamburg, Bremen. In these famous letters, sent between 1323 and 1324, Gediminas launches a brilliant diplomatic and propaganda offensive. He complains bitterly about the aggression of the Teutonic Knights, painting them not as holy crusaders spreading the faith, but as bloodthirsty invaders who use the cross as an excuse for plunder and conquest, attacking Christians and pagans alike. Then comes the masterstroke. He announces his respect for the Christian faith and hints at his own willingness to be baptized, but only by the Pope's direct emissaries, not by the swords of the order. Historians still argue whether Gediminas' offers to be baptized were a sincere desire to modernize his state and end the conflict, or a series of clever diplomatic bluffs designed to buy time, sow discord between the knights and the Pope, and attract skilled immigrants. Whatever his true motive, he then pivots from diplomacy to economic development. His letters become a grand invitation, a medieval recruitment flyer sent to all of Europe. He calls for merchants, knights, squires, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, tanners, stonemasons, anyone with a skill, to come to Lithuania. He promises them tax exemptions for a decade, land to farm, and most radically of all, the freedom to practice their own religion. Catholic or Orthodox, it did not matter. It was the 14th century version of a LinkedIn message from a startup CEO. Come to scenic Vilnius. We have a dynamic, fast-paced environment, great growth opportunities, and a slight ongoing issue with crusading warrior monks. Details to follow. The reaction from the Teutonic Order is one of absolute fury. The Grand Master reading Gediminas' letter to the Pope must have been a sight. It was pure, "I'd like to speak to your manager" energy, and the knights were not thrilled about being the subject of the complaint. They desperately try to suppress the letters, claiming they are forgeries, that the pagan duke is a devious liar. But it's too late. The letters circulate, and Gediminas' message has its intended effect. He has successfully reframed the conflict. He is no longer just a heathen warlord. He is a tolerant, reasonable ruler seeking peace and prosperity, being victimized by a corrupt and aggressive military order. And the people he invited? Some of them actually come. You see them arriving in Vilnius. German merchants setting up shop, skilled artisans bringing new technologies. The city, which was mostly a collection of wooden buildings around the Duke's castle, begins to change. The first brick and stone houses appear, built by the newcomers. The marketplace buzzes with different languages. Gediminas is not just fighting a war. He is building a state, and he knows that people and skills are as important as soldiers. Vilnius under Gediminas was getting its first real urban renewal project. The city motto was changing from "Watch out for that mud pit" to "Watch out for that mud pit, but hey look, a German baker." Gediminas showed that Lithuania could be more than just a bastion of pagan resistance. It could be a player on the European stage, fighting with diplomacy, propaganda, and economic policy as effectively as it fought with the sword. While Gediminas fights his war of letters from Vilnius, the grim reality for most Lithuanians remains the constant threat of the Crusaders' devastating raids. Diplomacy is a shield for the state, but on the frontier, survival depends on more tangible defenses. You leave the growing capital and travel towards the borderlands where the war is a relentless, physical presence. Here you will witness the construction of the backbone of Lithuanian resistance, the hill fort. You stand at the base of one, and it is a truly imposing sight. It is not the elegant stone castle of the Rhine or the Loire. It is a raw, elemental fortress, a mountain of earth and wood sculpted by human hands. These hill forts, known as Pilis Kalnai, are the anchors of the Lithuanian defensive network. They are typically built on prominent natural hills or river bluffs. Their slopes artificially steepen to a terrifying degree, making them almost impossible to climb under fire. You watch as an entire community works to raise a new rampart. This is not the work of paid masons, it is a massive communal effort. Men, women, and older children haul basket after basket of earth, packing it down to create a towering defensive wall. Others fell giant oaks, shaping the logs with broad axes to create the tall, sharpened palisade that will crown the earthwork. Still others dig, deepening the wide moat at the base of the hill. This was the ultimate community project. Forget building a playground. These people were building a fortress designed to stop the medieval equivalent of a tank division. The bake sale for fundraising must have been epic. This landscape is studded with such fortresses. Archaeologists have identified the remains of over 1,000 of them in Lithuania, a dense interlocking system of defense that covered the entire country, especially along the riverways that served as the primary invasion routes for the Teutonic Knights. You climb to the top of the rampart and examine the design. It is deceptively sophisticated. The earthen walls are often reinforced with an internal timber frame, a skeleton of logs that gives the structure immense stability. The outer face is frequently coated with a thick layer of wet clay. This served two purposes. It made the steep slope incredibly slippery for any attackers trying to scale it, and it offered a surprising degree of protection against fire, the great enemy of any wooden fortification. On top of this massive earthwork stands the palisade, a wall of thick, upright logs, behind which runs a fighting platform. From here, the defenders can rain down arrows, javelins, rocks, and less conventional ammunition upon any besiegers. When the rocks and arrows ran low, defenders were known to get creative. Nothing says go away. Quite like a bucket of night soil, raw human waste, hurled down from the walls. It was not just psychologically devastating. The bacteria in the filth could easily infect minor wounds, making it an early grim form of biological warfare. Historians still argue whether the design of Lithuanian hill forts evolved independently based on local traditions, or if they were deliberately adapted and improved in a direct technological arms race, copying and countering the siege techniques of the Teutonic Knights. As the Crusaders brought bigger and better catapults and siege towers, the Lithuanian ramparts grew higher, the moats deeper, and the gatehouse defenses more complex. The entrance was never a straight path, but a winding, angled corridor, forcing attackers into a kill zone where they could be hit from multiple directions. The hill fort was far more than just a military base. It was the heart of the local community. The local duke lived there, but in times of a major invasion, the entire population of the surrounding area would retreat inside its walls, with their families and their precious livestock. It was the community panic room, storage unit, and town hall all rolled into one, and it had great views if you didn't mind the occasional flaming arrow. You look out from the watchtower, across the sea of trees. and you can just make out the faint silhouette of another hill fort on a distant ridge. Each was a link in a chain, able to signal the others with smoke or fire, creating a network that could track and harry an invading army. These thousands of fortresses built from the very soil of the land they were meant to defend are the perfect symbol of the Lithuanian resistance. Decentralized, resilient, deeply rooted, and stubbornly, earth-movingly defiant. You stand within the formidable wooden walls of a hill fort, a bastion of Lithuanian resilience. From here, it feels like the world is divided into a simple binary. Us and them, the defenders of the forest and the crusading invaders. But as you are invited into the smoky longhouse of the resident duke, you discover that the most dangerous enemies are not always the ones outside the gates. The politics of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania are a tangled, treacherous web of family ambition, sibling rivalry, and bitter blood feuds, a constant internal struggle that the Teutonic Knights were masters at exploiting. After the death of the great Gediminas, the Grand Duchy was not passed to a single heir. Instead, following tradition, it was divided among his many sons, each becoming the ruler of a specific territory. This created a delicate and often unstable balance of power. For a time, however, this system produced a partnership of breathtaking efficiency. You are present at a meeting between the two most powerful of Gediminas' sons, Algirdas and Kęstutis. They were a study in contrasts. Algirdas, who held the title of Grand Duke in Vilnius, is the statesman. His gaze is turned eastward, focused on expanding Lithuania's empire into the vast, fractured lands of the former Kievan Rus. He is shrewd, patient, and politically astute. His brother, Kęstutis, is the archetypal pagan warrior, lord of Trakai and Samogitia. His entire life is dedicated to one thing: the defense of the western frontier against the Teutonic Knights. He is a man of action, beloved by his troops, the living embodiment of Lithuanian resistance. For over 30 years, these two brothers co-ruled in a near-perfect diarchy. It was the ultimate medieval buddy cop movie. Kęstutis was the grizzled, loose-cannon warrior who didn't play by the rules, and Algirdas was the smooth-talking, politically savvy captain managing the big picture. Their partnership was Lithuania's greatest strategic asset. While Kęstutis and his Samogitian warriors absorbed the full, relentless pressure of the crusader war machine in the west, Algirdas was free to conduct his brilliant campaigns in the east. He annexed huge territories, including the city of Kiev, transforming the Grand Duchy of Lithuania into one of the largest states in Europe. This remarkable stability, however, was an exception. Other family members were not so cooperative. You witness firsthand how a disgruntled duke could become the Crusaders' most potent weapon. A cousin of the ruling brothers, feeling he's been cheated of his rightful inheritance, does the unthinkable. He defects. He rides to a Teutonic castle, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. He offers to accept baptism and pledges his loyalty to the order. In exchange, he asks for an army to help him reclaim his lands from his relatives. The knights are delighted. A Lithuanian civil war is the best possible news. A high-ranking defector can provide invaluable intelligence. The layout of hill forts, the secret paths through the swamps, the political divisions within the court. Running to the Teutonic Knights was the medieval equivalent of posting a massive family drama rant on social media. It was very public, very messy, and guaranteed to make the next holiday gathering incredibly awkward. Historians still argue whether these internal conflicts were purely personal power grabs driven by ambition and greed, or if they represented deeper policy disputes. For example, a pro-Christian, pro-Western faction versus a staunch pagan isolationist faction within the ruling dynasty. Whatever the cause, the results were often chaotic. The knights became masters of playing one branch of the family against another, offering their support first to one claimant, then to another, all the while weakening the entire Lithuanian state. Their suggestion box was probably just full of notes from Lithuanian dukes saying, "My cousin got a bigger hill fort than I did, and I think you guys should do something about it." They were basically medieval divorce lawyers, and the divorce was always messy and involved catapults. This constant threat from within meant that a Grand Duke of Lithuania had to be a master of two kinds of warfare: the brutal physical war against the Crusaders, and the subtle psychological war against his own ambitious relatives. The unity of the Grand Duchy was a fragile treasure, constantly threatened by the enemy within. To truly understand why this war raged for so long, you have to leave the dark forests of Lithuania and see the conflict from the other side. You cross the border into Prussia, the domain of the Teutonic Order, and make your way to their magnificent headquarters, the Castle of Marienburg. This is the largest brick fortress in the world, a breathtaking statement of power and piety. But you are not seeing it through the eyes of a grim, battle-hardened knight brother. Instead, you are with a newcomer, a wealthy young knight from England or France, arriving here on a great adventure. By the 14th century, the Crusades to the Holy Land are over. For a European nobleman with a taste for glory and a concern for his eternal soul, the Lithuanian frontier is the only war in town. This is the Preußenreise of the Prussian journey. This was the ultimate 14th century adventure travel package. Join us for a 2-week all-inclusive crusade. Experience thrilling raids, meet famous knights, and earn plenary indulgence for your sins. Swamp-related illnesses and existential dread not included in the price. The Teutonic Order actively encouraged and brilliantly marketed these military tours. Guest crusaders, including future kings like Henry IV of England, flocked here, providing the order with a constant stream of fresh, well-equipped manpower, and more importantly, immense prestige and political connections across Europe. For the visiting knight, the experience begins not with hardship, but with pageantry. You are welcomed into the grand halls of Marienburg and treated to a lavish feast at the Ehrentisch, the table of honor. This was an elaborate banquet hosted by the Grand Master himself to celebrate the most renowned knights present. Bards would sing of their chivalric deeds, and a place at this table was one of the greatest honors a European knight could achieve. After days of feasting and ceremony, the Reise itself begins. A long column of knight brothers, local troops, and their glamorous, well-armed guests rides out from the castle gates. The mood is one of excitement, of chivalric camaraderie. But the purpose of this expedition is not to conquer and hold territory. It is a punitive raid, designed to inflict the maximum amount of economic and psychological damage. The column crosses into Lithuania, and the mask of chivalry begins to slip. You see the brutal reality of this holy war. A village is surrounded. The wooden houses and the grain stores are put to the torch. Livestock is slaughtered or driven off. Any villagers who cannot escape into the forest are taken captive, destined for a life of servitude back in Prussia. The guest knight is there to get a cool story for his memoirs, and maybe a mention from the court poet. The Lithuanian farmer is just hoping his family and his only cow can hide in the swamp, before Sir Reginald of Chivalry torches his house for the glory of God. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these guest crusaders was genuine religious piety and a desire to spread Christianity, or if it was predominantly a secular pursuit of chivalric honor, adventure, and the social prestige that came with having fought the heathen. For most, it was likely an inseparable blend of both. They could be honorable knights seeking glory, and devout Christians saving their souls, all in the same bloody enterprise. After a week or two of raiding, the column returns to Marienburg, often with a train of miserable captives and stolen goods in tow. The guest crusaders are hailed as heroes. They have fulfilled their vow. They have fought the infidel. They have great stories to tell. The perfect souvenir from a Reise wasn't a t-shirt. It was a cool scar, a captured pagan banner, and the right to casually drop. That one time I was crusading in Lithuania, at dinner parties for the rest of your life. This institutionalized war tourism created a perverse and self-perpetuating cycle. The Teutonic Order's very existence and legitimacy depended on the continuation of this holy war. Peace would have been a disaster for them, turning off the tap of guest crusaders and their money. So the war had to be kept simmering, with regular raids providing the chivalric theater that kept the nobility of Europe coming back for more. The forgotten archives of Lithuania were being written in part to satisfy the tourist trade. You turn your back on the relentless, brutal, and strangely chivalrous war of the western frontier. Leaving the realm of the Reise behind, you travel east with the other half of Lithuania's powerful diarchy, the Grand Duke Algirdas himself. The landscape here begins to change. The dense primeval forest giving way to a wide-open landscape of rolling plains, agricultural lands, and ancient cities with onion-domed churches. The nature of the conflict is different here too. This is not a holy war against a crusading order. This is a grand geopolitical struggle for the inheritance of a fallen empire. The lands before you are the principalities of the former Kievan Ruses, a world of East Slavic peoples who are Orthodox Christians. They are politically fractured, caught in a vice between the growing power of Lithuania to the west and the waning, but still dangerous dominion of the Mongol Golden Horde to the south. Algirdas's genius was in recognizing this opportunity. While his brother Kęstutis bled the Teutonic Knights dry on the Prussian border, Algirdas conducted a masterful campaign of expansion, more than doubling the size of the Grand Duchy. You ride with his army and see that his methods are a world away from the scorched earth tactics of the West. His expansion is less about conquest and more about absorption. He presents himself not as a foreign invader, but as a liberator and a legitimate ruler who can offer protection from the Mongols and a better deal than the rising rival power of Moscow. His famous policy towards his new subjects was, "We destroy nothing old, we introduce nothing new." Local Ruthenian nobles who swore allegiance to him were allowed to keep their lands, their titles, their Orthodox faith, and their traditional laws. Algirdas's takeover strategy was basically under new management, but the menu's the same. It was a remarkably effective way to build an empire without having to fight for every single village. Algirdas himself is a fascinating and enigmatic figure. Christian chroniclers, who otherwise despised him as a pagan tyrant, noted with a certain grudging respect his personal austerity. He was famously abstemious, drinking no alcohol, no beer, no wine, and not even the honeyed mead so central to his own culture. He was a disciplined, reserved, and deeply strategic thinker. His personal faith is a source of endless fascination. Historians still argue whether Algirdas remained a staunch pagan his entire life, as Lithuanian tradition holds, or if he was secretly baptized into the Orthodox faith, perhaps to placate his two Orthodox wives and his largely Orthodox subjects. He built Orthodox cathedrals for his wives in Vilnius, yet was likely cremated after his death in a full pagan ritual with his horse and weapons. He remains a puzzle. The primary rival in this great eastern expansion was the Grand Duchy of Moscow, another principality vying to become the unifier of the Ruses' lands. The struggle between Lithuania and Moscow would define the politics of Eastern Europe for centuries to come. Algirdas saw the Muscovites as a major threat and led his armies on 3 separate campaigns right to the gates of Moscow. He never managed to take the heavily fortified Kremlin, but it was the medieval equivalent of repeatedly parking your tanks on your rival's lawn just to let them know you could. It sent a clear message about who the dominant power in the region was. By the end of Algirdas's reign in 1377, the state he ruled was a paradox. In its ethnic heartland, it was the pagan Grand Duchy of Lithuania, locked in a desperate struggle for survival against the forces of Catholic Christendom. But this pagan core now sat at the head of a vast empire, stretching from the Baltic Sea nearly to the Black Sea. The majority of the Grand Duchy's population was now East Slavic, and their religion was Orthodox Christianity. The Grand Duchy was the ultimate mullet of medieval states, pagan resistance in the front, sophisticated multicultural empire in the back. This incredible success, however, sowed the seeds of a future crisis. A small pagan elite could not rule over a vast Christian majority forever. The very identity of Lithuania had been transformed, and this demographic reality would soon force his successors to make a choice that would change the destiny of their nation. While Algirdas was playing the grand game of empire in the East, forging a multicultural superpower through diplomacy and strategic annexation, someone had to hold the western door against the full, undivided fury of the Crusaders. You travel back from the sprawling plains of the Rus to the claustrophobic, war-torn frontier of Samogitia. Here you find the other pillar of the Lithuanian state, Algirdas's brother, Kęstutis. You don't find him in a palace in Vilnius. You find him where he is most at home, sitting by a campfire with his warriors in the shadow of a wooden hill fort, his face lined by the sun and the smoke of 100 campaigns, his eyes sharp and alert. He is the guardian of the West, the shield of Lithuania, and the living embodiment of the pagan warrior spirit. Where Algirdas was reserved and ascetic, Kęstutis is charismatic and connected to his men. He is the classic warrior prince, a brilliant and tireless commander who for over 40 years was the undisputed leader of the pagan resistance. His entire life was a relentless war against the Teutonic and Livonian orders. He led countless defensive actions, organized dozens of punishing counter-raids deep into Prussia, was wounded many times, and was even captured by the knights on several occasions. His job title was Duke of Trakai, but his actual duties were Chief Crusader Repellent and Head of Unwelcome Committee for Knights on Tour. Benefits included constant mortal peril and the undying loyalty of his people. Over the decades, a strange and grudging respect developed between Kęstutis and his sworn enemies. The Teutonic Knights saw him as the ultimate obstacle, a cunning and seemingly invincible foe, but they also saw in him a reflection of their own chivalric ideals. He was known to be a man of his word, a warrior who treated his high-ranking captives with honor, and a leader of unshakable courage. Even the Teutonic Knights had to admit Kęstutis was a class act. He burned our villages and routed our armies, yes, but he did it with a certain panache, you have to admit. It's the ultimate frenemy situation. This reputation was cemented by his legendary escape from captivity in 1361. Imprisoned in a tower in the Crusaders, supposedly impregnable headquarters of Marienburg, he didn't despair. With the help of a loyal Lithuanian servant working in the castle, he managed to acquire tools, break a hole through the 3-meter-thick fortress wall over many weeks, and lower himself down with a rope made from torn clothing. Breaking out of the world's biggest, most secure brick fortress, Kęstutis had a flair for the dramatic. It was the medieval Shawshank Redemption, but with more chainmail and a much worse diet. This combination of cunning, courage, and charisma earned him the fanatical loyalty of his men, especially the stubbornly pagan Samogideans. He was not a distant ruler sending orders from the capital. He lived their life, fought their battles, and shared their unwavering commitment to defending the old ways. But was he content with this role? Historians still argue whether Kęstutis was content with his role as the shield of Lithuania, loyally serving his brother, or if he harbored ambitions to be the sole ruler, ambitions that were simply kept in check by his deep bond with Algirdas. For as long as Algirdas lived, the partnership held a perfect symbiosis of conquest and defense that made Lithuania a superpower. Kęstutis was the anchor, the unyielding pagan heart of the nation, the rock against which the waves of the crusade crashed and broke for nearly half a century. But this perfect balance depended entirely on the two brothers. When Algirdas died in 1377, the stability he and Kęstutis had built was shattered, and the aging warrior of the West would soon find himself in a new war, not against the men of the Cross, but against his own nephew. The air in the hill fort is thick with tension. The great Grand Duke Algirdas is dead, and the perfect partnership that held Lithuania together for a generation is broken. The future is an uncertain, darkening path. Around the crackling campfire, as the warriors sharpen their blades and speak in low tones, an old storyteller, a Kanklininkis, begins to pluck a simple tune on his lap harp. He senses the mood and knows that now is a time for stories of origin and destiny, a reminder of what it is they fight for. He begins to tell the tale of the founding of their great capital, Vilnius, and the prophetic dream of the Grand Duke Gediminas. His story takes you back in time to the early 14th century. Gediminas, the great diplomat and state builder, is on a hunt in the sacred forests of the Šventaragis Valley, near the confluence of the Vilnia and Neris rivers. This is already a holy place, a valley where, legends say, the earliest Lithuanian dukes were honored with ritual cremation. After a long and successful day, having slain a mighty aurochs, the great wild ox of the primeval forest, Gediminas and his retinue make camp for the night. As the Grand Duke sleeps upon his bearskin cloak, a powerful and strange dream comes to him. Most people's weird dreams involve showing up to work without pants. Gediminas's dreams involved giant, howling, metallic wolves. It's a whole different level of subconscious stress. In his vision, he sees a great hill, and upon its summit stands a colossal wolf. But its fur is not fur at all. It is made of iron, gleaming like armor in the moonlight. As Gediminas watches, the iron wolf throws back its head, and from deep within its metallic body comes the sound of 100 other wolves howling. A sound so loud and powerful it echoes across all the forests and plains of Lithuania. Gediminas awakens at dawn, the sound of the howling still ringing in his ears. Deeply moved and troubled by the vision, he summons his chief pagan priest, the Krivis, a wise man named Lizdeka. According to legend, Lizdeka was given the gift of prophecy because he was discovered as an infant, abandoned, but safe in a great eagle's nest. The name Lizdeka deriving from the Lithuanian word for nest, lizdas. Gediminas recounts his dream, and the priest listens intently before giving his interpretation. "My lord," Lizdeka says, "the iron wolf you saw is a great castle and a mighty city that you will found upon that hill. It is a fortress that will be as strong and impregnable as iron. And the howling of the 100 wolves within it is the sound of its fame. This city will become the capital of Lithuania, and its glory will echo throughout the world." Historians still argue whether the Iron Wolf legend is an authentic pagan-era myth that was passed down orally for centuries or if it was a later creation, perhaps written in the 15th or 16th century, to retroactively give the capital a more glorious and prophetic origin story, similar to the story of Romulus and Remus for Rome. Regardless of its origin, its power is undeniable. Acting upon the prophecy, Gediminas moves his capital from the old stronghold of Trakai and commands that a new city be built at the confluence of the two rivers. Vilnius, the city of the Iron Wolf's dream, is born. So, Vilnius was founded based on a dream interpreted by a guy supposedly found in an eagle's nest. It's maybe not the most conventional approach to urban planning, but you can't argue with the results. The storyteller falls silent, letting the meaning of the tale settle over the assembled warriors. The capital, Vilnius, is not just a strategic location. It is their prophesied destiny. It is the iron heart of their nation. Fighting for your capital is one thing. Fighting for the divinely ordained city of the giant metal wolf? That's a whole other level of motivation. And it is this sacred prize, this city of legend, that is now held by Algirdus' son and successor. The coming struggle will not just be for political power, but for the soul of the nation, the heart of the Iron Wolf's prophecy. The storyteller's voice fades, leaving the legend of the Iron Wolf hanging in the smoky air of the hill fort. It is a story of noble origin, of divine destiny. But stories are weapons, and the Lithuanians were not the only ones who wielded them. To understand the true nature of this war, you must now experience the conflict from the other side, not on the battlefield, but in the quiet scriptoriums of the Teutonic Order. You are in a cold stone room in a monastery in Prussia. Monks in dark robes are bent over desks, their quills scratching across sheets of parchment. They are the Order's historians, men like Peter von Duisburg, and they are engaged in a second, equally important crusade, a psychological war of faith. The Teutonic Order had to perpetually justify its existence. It needed a constant flow of money from across the continent, and a steady stream of those guest crusaders you met earlier. To ensure this, they needed a compelling villain. Their chronicles became their greatest weapon of propaganda, crafting a narrative that painted the pagan Lithuanians not merely as unbelievers, but as monstrous, demonic agents of evil, deserving only of swift and total extermination. You lean over a chronicler's shoulder and read the words taking shape on the page. The descriptions are vivid, detailed, and utterly damning. The Lithuanians, he writes, do not simply worship nature, they worship demons that lurk in the trees and swamps. Their sacred groves are not holy places but sites of obscene rituals where they sacrifice Christian prisoners to their fiendish gods. The slander extends beyond religion into every aspect of their lives. The chroniclers claim the Lithuanians are savages who buy and sell their wives like cattle. They accuse them of practicing ritual infanticide, of callously abandoning their elderly and sick to die of exposure in the forest. They weave tales of bizarre and sinister cults. One popular and lurid story describes how every Lithuanian household supposedly kept a sacred serpent in a corner of their home, a living idol that they would feed with milk and worship as a household god. The Teutonic Order's official history of Lithuania reads like a heavy metal album cover. Here be demons, snake worshippers, and unholy rituals. It was less objective historical account and more promotional brochure for a war against Satan's vacation home. The purpose of this relentless campaign of dehumanization was brutally simple. If your enemy is a demonic monster who kills his own children and worships snakes, then he is not entitled to the normal rules of war. Killing him is not a sin, it is a holy act. Burning his village is not an atrocity, it is a cleansing. Taking his children into slavery is not a crime, it is a rescue mission. This narrative justified the entire crusading enterprise, transforming a brutal war of conquest into a righteous struggle between absolute good and absolute evil. For modern historians, these texts are a maddening puzzle. Historians still argue whether certain bizarre practices described by the chroniclers contain a kernel of truth about pagan rituals that we can no longer understand, or if they were complete fabrications invented out of whole cloth to fit a pre-existing stereotype of the evil heathen. This propaganda was devastatingly effective. In an age before mass media, the order controlled the entire information flow. In the 14th century, you couldn't fact-check things on the internet. If a guy in a very serious-looking robe wrote in a very fancy book that Lithuanians had horns, a lot of people just thought, well, that's terrible. I should probably go and fight them. The Lithuanians, being a largely pre-literate society when it came to books and chronicles, had no way to counter this narrative on the European stage. Their history was oral, kept alive in songs and myths. It was the ultimate information imbalance. The Teutonic Order had a monopoly on the media. The Lithuanians' only public statements were delivered via ambush, which, while effective, tended to reach a much smaller and briefly lived audience. This psychological war poisoned the well of European opinion, ensuring that for 2 centuries, the fires of the Northern Crusade would be stoked by a narrative of righteous hatred. Decades have passed since the great diarchy of Algirdas and Kęstutis. The story of those years is a tangled and tragic epic of its own, a bitter civil war that saw cousin pitted against cousin. Algirdas's clever son, Jogaila, and Kęstutis's brilliant son, Vytautas, vied for control. The old warrior Kęstutis was treacherously murdered, and for a time it seemed the Grand Duchy would tear itself apart, with both Jogaila and Vytautas, in moments of desperation, making temporary alliances with their supposed mortal enemies, the Teutonic Knights. The family tree of the Lithuanian Grand Dukes in this period looks like the plot of a soap opera, complete with betrayals, prison escapes, and strategic marriages. But out of this chaos, a decision was made that would change the map of Europe forever. In 1385, seeking a powerful ally to finally end the civil war and counter the Knights, Jogaila made an audacious move. He agreed to marry Jadwiga, the young Queen of Poland. But the price was high. In the Union of Krakow, Jogaila pledged to accept Catholic baptism, not just for himself, but for his entire nation. In 1387, Lithuania officially converted to Christianity. The last pagan state in Europe was no more. Jogaila became the King of Poland, forging a personal union between the two great powers. The Teutonic Knights' entire reason for being, their 200-year-long holy war against the pagans, was now officially obsolete. Yet they refused to stop. Proclaiming the conversion a sham, they continued their devastating raids, their war now exposed for what it had always been, a relentless drive for land and power. Eventually the cousins, Jogaila and Vytautas, reconciled. Vytautas was made Grand Duke of Lithuania, ruling in his cousin the king's name. Together, these two brilliant leaders, once mortal enemies, united their nations against the common foe. The final trigger comes, as it so often does, from stubborn Samogitia. Another rebellion breaks out against the Knights, secretly supported by Vytautas. This time, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order has had enough. In 1409, he declares war not just on Lithuania, but on Poland as well. The time for raids and skirmishes is over. This will be a final, decisive reckoning. You are now standing in the combined Polish-Lithuanian camp. It is the eve of battle, July 14th, 1410. The sheer scale of the army is breathtaking. You have never seen so many men in one place. Historians still argue over the exact numbers, but it was undoubtedly one of the largest battles of the entire Middle Ages, a true clash of titans. The army is a study in contrasts. On one side are the Poles, thousands of heavily armored knights, their steel plate polished to a mirror shine, their colorful banners snapping in the breeze. They are a formidable modern Western European army. Then you walk through the Lithuanian part of the camp. It is a far more eclectic force. Here are the Lithuanian warriors, lighter and more mobile. Next to them are vast contingents of Orthodox Ruthenian spearmen from the eastern territories of the Grand Duchy. And most strikingly, you see a large encampment of Tatar horsemen, Muslim warriors from the Golden Horde, led by the exiled Khan Jalal al-Din, who had found refuge and alliance with Vytautas. Vytautas's army was the most diverse fighting force in Europe. You had Catholic nobles, pagan-descended warriors, Orthodox Slavs, and Muslim Tatars, all united under one banner. It was like a UN peacekeeping force, but with a lot more yelling and pointy sticks. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, horses, and nervous sweat. In the Polish camp, thousands of knights attend a pre-battle mass. In the Lithuanian camp, the atmosphere is different, a mix of rituals and quiet preparations. You see the two cousins, King Jogaila and Grand Duke Vytautas, once enemies now bound by a common purpose. Tomorrow they will face the largest, most disciplined, and most technologically advanced army the Teutonic Order has ever fielded. 2 centuries of violence have led to this field near the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg. The fate of nations hangs in the balance. The sun rises on the morning of July 15, 1410, burning the mist off a vast rolling plain between the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg. 2 armies stand facing each other, the culmination of 2 centuries of hatred, faith, and war. On a low rise, you see the Teutonic Order. They are a wall of iron and faith, a sea of white mantles emblazoned with the stark black cross. They are outnumbered, but they are the most disciplined, best equipped, and most feared heavy cavalry in Europe. Their Grand Master, the arrogant and aggressive Ulrich von Jungingen, is confident of victory. Opposite them, sprawling across the fields and along the edge of the woods, is the vast, multicolored host of the Polish-Lithuanian alliance. The Poles in their polished steel are on the left. The Lithuanians, with their Ruthenian and Tatar allies, are on the right, commanded by the brilliant Grand Duke Vytautas. King Jogaila commands the entire force from a hill in the rear. For hours, nothing happens. The 2 armies watch each other in a tense, silent standoff under the brutal summer sun. The knights hold the high ground and wait, hoping to force their enemy to make an exhausting uphill charge. But Jogaila and Vytautas are patient. Annoyed by this delay, the Grand Master makes a gesture of supreme chivalric arrogance. He sends 2 heralds carrying 2 bare swords to the allied commanders. It is a taunt, a gift of weapons to enemies he deems too cowardly to begin the fight. Jogaila calmly accepts the swords and the die is cast. The battle begins with a roar. On the allied right wing, Vytautas gives the order, and the Lithuanian cavalry, along with their Tatar allies, surges forward. A cloud of arrows from the Tatar horsemen darkens the sky, followed by the thunder of thousands of hooves as the Lithuanians crash into the Order's left flank. The fighting is furious, a chaotic melee of slashing swords and splintering lances. For about an hour, the Lithuanians press the attack, but the iron wall of the Teutonic Knights holds firm. Then, the unthinkable happens. The Lithuanian line appears to shatter. They break, turn, and begin a chaotic, headlong flight from the battlefield. A great cheer goes up from the crusader ranks. To them, it looks like a complete rout. The battle all but won. It was the biggest, just kidding, in military history. Breaking formation, a large number of the knights charge in hot pursuit of the fleeing cowards, eager to turn the rout into a massacre. They have taken the bait. Historians still argue whether the Lithuanian retreat was a brilliantly executed tactical masterstroke from the start, or a genuine rout that Vytautas, with incredible skill, managed to rally and turn back into the fight at the decisive moment. Either way, it sealed the Order's fate. While a portion of the Crusader army is now miles away, chasing the ghosts of Vytautas's army, the main force engages the heavily armored Polish knights. This is the heart of the battle, a brutal, grinding slugfest. The lines bend and sway. The ground grows slick with blood. At the critical moment, with the knights fully committed, the trap springs shut. The supposedly fleeing Lithuanian forces suddenly reappear, wheeling around to smash into the rear and flank of the disorganized knights who had pursued them. Simultaneously, Jogaila releases his own reserve cavalry, which crashes into the flank of the main Crusader army. The Teutonic Order is now enveloped, attacked from three sides. Grandmaster von Jungingen, seeing the disaster unfolding, gathers his final reserves and leads a desperate last-ditch charge into the heart of the Polish lines. In the swirling chaos of the melee, he is cut down and killed. The death of the Grandmaster is the final blow. The legendary discipline of the Teutonic Order evaporates. The battle turns from a chess match into a full-blown bar fight. Command breaks down, and the fight for victory becomes a desperate scramble for survival. Trapped and surrounded, the knights are systematically destroyed. The defeat becomes a catastrophe. As the sun sets, the field is a ruin. Nearly the entire leadership of the Teutonic Order, including the Grand Master and most of his high commanders, lies dead. Thousands of their finest knight brothers and soldiers have been killed or captured. It is a victory more total and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The great crusading army has been utterly annihilated. The sun rises on a scene of almost unimaginable carnage. You walk across the now silent battlefield of Grunwald, and the scale of the victory, and its cost, is laid bare. The ground is a ruin of broken wagons, shattered lances, and abandoned banners trampled into the mud. You see the bodies of thousands of men and horses. The white mantles of the Knight brothers are strewn across the field like fallen leaves, their black crosses stark against the pale dawn. Here and there, priests move among the dead and dying, giving last rites, while weary soldiers search for their fallen comrades and gather the immense spoils of war. The great army of the Teutonic Order is not just defeated, it has ceased to exist. With their enemy annihilated, and the road to the Order's capital, Marienburg, wide open, you expect a swift, decisive march to end the war. But a strange inertia settles over the victorious army. For 3 days, the Polish and Lithuanian forces remain on the battlefield, tending to their wounded, burying their dead, and celebrating their monumental triumph. After winning the Super Bowl of medieval battles, you'd think they'd sprint to the finish line. Instead, the Allied army took a 3-day weekend on the battlefield. It was perhaps the most consequential admin day in military history. This delay, however brief, proves fatal to the dream of a quick end to the conflict. A resourceful German commander, Heinrich von Plauen, uses those 3 days to race to Marienburg with a small contingent of men, evict the wavering city garrison, and organize a desperate, last-ditch defense. When the Allied army finally arrives before the walls of the world's largest brick castle, the moment of shock has passed. The gates are barred, the walls are manned, and the chance for an easy victory is gone. The siege that follows is long and frustrating. The Polish-Lithuanian army is a magnificent force on the open field, but it is not equipped for a protracted siege against such a formidable fortress. Disease begins to fester in the summer heat of the Allied camp. The Lithuanian forces under Vytautas, their term of service limited and their own lands now vulnerable to counterattack, are the first to withdraw. Soon after, the Polish nobles, weary of the campaign and eager to return to their estates, pressure King Jogaila to lift the siege. The great army melts away, leaving Marienburg battered but unconquered. Historians still argue whether the delay and the subsequent failure to capture Marienburg was a catastrophic strategic blunder by King Jogaila, a result of logistical exhaustion after a massive battle, or a deliberate political choice, perhaps to avoid making his powerful cousin Vytautas of Lithuania too powerful by completely destroying the order. What is certain is that the war did not end there. It ground on for months more until the broken and bankrupted order sued for peace. The resulting First Peace of Thorn in 1411 was surprisingly lenient. The order was forced to pay a crippling financial indemnity that would bankrupt them for generations, and they had to renounce their claims to Samogitia, but only for the lifetimes of Jogaila and Vytautas. They lost almost none of their core territory. For an empire that had just been crushed, the knights got off relatively lightly. Their lawyers must have been very, very good. But the Battle of Grunwald had broken something more important than the Order OS army. It had broken their mystique. Their reputation for invincibility was shattered forever. The guest crusaders from Western Europe stopped coming. There was little chivalric glory to be won fighting for a bankrupt and defeated state. The Teutonic Order went from being the invincible champions of Christendom to that one group that got completely wrecked at Grunwald. It really hurt their brand. The great beast had been mortally wounded, but it would take several more decades of intermittent warfare before it finally collapsed. Grunwald was the end of the beginning, a victory that secured the future of Lithuania and Poland, even if the peace it brought was fragile and long in the coming. In the decades that follow the great victory at Grunwald, one figure comes to dominate the story of Lithuania. He is a man you have met before, the son of the pagan hero Kęstutis, the cousin and rival of King Jogaila. He is Vytautas, and now, in the twilight of the long struggle, he comes into his own as Vytautas the Great. You see him now not as a desperate rebel, but as the undisputed ruler of a victorious and powerful Grand Duchy. He is a man of boundless energy and towering ambition, a brilliant strategist in both the field and the council chamber. He is the ultimate product of his tumultuous era. Baptized 3 separate times in 2 different faiths for political expediency, he allied with the Teutonic Knights to survive, only to later engineer their destruction. He is the embodiment of Lithuania's cunning, resilience, and grand ambition. With the Teutonic threat largely neutralized after Grunwald, Vytautas turns his gaze southward. His vision is not merely to defend Lithuania, but to make it the hegemon of all Eastern Europe. He dreams of an empire stretching from the Baltic all the way to the Black Sea, controlling the lucrative trade routes that connect the East and West. You follow him as he leads his armies deep into the southern steppes, pushing back the Golden Horde and extending Lithuanian fortifications to the coast. Under his rule, the Grand Duchy reaches its maximum territorial extent, becoming for a time the largest state in Europe. Vytautas had the political energy of a hurricane. One day he's negotiating with the Holy Roman Emperor, the next he's leading a cavalry charge against the Tatars, and by Friday he's redrawing the entire administrative map of the country. The man did not rest. He was not, however, infallible. His grand ambitions once led him to a catastrophic defeat years before Grunwald, at the Battle of the Vorskla River in 1399, where the Tatars lured his overconfident army into a trap and annihilated it. The disaster humbled him and forced him to rely more heavily on his alliance with Poland. But after Grunwald, his power was supreme. He centralized the state, replacing the troublesome regional dukes with loyal governors, and fostered a unique identity for his vast multi-ethnic empire. His lifelong relationship with his cousin, King Jogaila of Poland, remained the central axis of his political life. Historians still argue whether Vytautas was ultimately content with his role as Grand Duke under the Polish king, or if his lifelong ambition was to break the union with Poland and establish himself as the sovereign king of an independent Lithuania. In his final years, this ambition came tantalizingly close to reality. The Holy Roman Emperor, a key player in European politics, offered to elevate Vytautas to the status of king. A grand coronation was planned for 1430 in Vilnius. It would have been the crowning achievement of his life, a declaration of Lithuania's sovereignty and its equal standing among the kingdoms of Europe. The Poles, however, were furious. A Lithuanian kingdom would mean the end of their personal union and the loss of their influence. As the imperial delegation traveled across Europe carrying the crown destined for Vytautas, Polish nobles ambushed the party and physically stole the crown. Having your crown stolen by your in-laws on the way to your own coronation is a pretty bad sign. It's the ultimate "I object" moment in international politics. Before a new crown could be made and sent, the drama was cut short by mortality. In the autumn of 1430, just weeks shy of his planned coronation, Vytautas the Great died at the age of 80. He died a Grand Duke, not a king. His death marks the end of an era. He was the last of the great warrior princes who had been born into a world still shaped by paganism and the Crusades. He took the defiant spirit of his father, Kęstutis, and the statecraft of his grandfather, Gediminas, and forged a superpower. He had expanded the country to its largest extent, beaten the Teutonic Knights, and nearly became king at 80. Vytautas didn't just have a great vision, he had the most productive retirement plan in medieval history. The death of Vytautas the Great marks the end of the heroic age. The existential struggle that defined Lithuania for 2 centuries is over. The Teutonic Order, humbled at Grunwald and bankrupted by the peace, is no longer a fearsome predator on the border, but a decaying relic. A problem for diplomats rather than for generals. The Great Holy War has sputtered out. You travel through the Lithuanian lands in the middle of the 15th century, a generation after the last of the great pagan-born warriors has passed, and you feel a profound and melancholy shift in the very atmosphere of the land. The victory was won, but the price of that victory is now slowly coming due. The final conversion of Lithuania was not achieved by the fire and sword of the Crusaders. They had tried for 200 years and failed. It was accomplished through a political marriage, a strategic decision made by the ruling elite to secure their place in the European order. Now you see the quiet, slow, and inexorable consequences of that decision. In the villages, you see the first small wooden parish churches rising, their simple crosses stark against the sky. They feel alien in this landscape of ancient forests and sacred hills. You revisit a sacred grove, a place that was once the vibrant heart of the community's spiritual life. The great ancient oaks still stand, but the sacrificial fires are out. The stone altars are cold and covered in moss. Perhaps an old woman still comes here at twilight to whisper a prayer and leave a hidden offering, but it is an act of memory, not of public faith. The old gods, however, did not simply pack up and leave. They were too deeply woven into the fabric of life, into the rhythm of the seasons. They did not vanish. They changed their clothes. You witness the fascinating process of religious syncretism, the blending of the old and the new. The great and fearsome thunder god, Perkunas, is not forgotten. Instead, his attributes, the lightning, the fiery chariot, the dominion over the sky, are quietly transferred to the Christian Saint Elijah. The local priest would preach about a saint, and the villagers would nod along thinking, ah yes, the sky dude with the lightning. We know him. He just has a new name and a better benefits package now. The gentle Earth Mother, Jamina, finds her roles as a protector and provider absorbed into the veneration of the Virgin Mary. The old ways survived by hiding in plain sight within the new faith. Historians still argue whether the persistence of these folk traditions represented a conscious hidden resistance to the new faith, or if it was a more unconscious natural blending of cultures where the peasantry saw no inherent contradiction between honoring an ancient sacred spring and attending church on Sunday. A cultural chasm begins to open. In the cities, the Lithuanian nobility becomes increasingly Polonized. They speak Polish at court, adopt Western European fashions, and embrace a devout, Orthodox Catholicism. But in the countryside, the Lithuanian-speaking peasants live in a different world, their days governed by ancient agricultural rhythms, and their Christianity deeply infused with the spirits and deities of their ancestors. The very spirit of the people is changing. The constant, existential threat that made every man a warrior is gone. The hill forts, once the heart of their defense, are slowly falling into disrepair, their earthen walls eroding, their wooden palisades rotting away. Generations of warriors were trained for lightning raids and forest ambushes. Their great-grandsons are now mostly concerned with crop rotation and arguing about property lines. It's a different kind of warfare. There is a deep and profound irony in this long, quiet peace. The Lithuanians fought with unimaginable courage and tenacity for 2 centuries to defend their homeland and their unique identity. They won, they survived, they built an empire. But in the process of securing that survival by joining Christian Europe, the very thing they fought for, their pagan faith, was destined to fade away. They fought for 2 centuries to avoid being converted by the sword, only to end up being converted by a marriage contract. It's the ultimate read the fine print moment in history. The old ways were not defeated in a blaze of glory. They were simply, quietly, and inexorably superseded. The church bells toll, and the farmer's offering to the ancient stone is reclaimed by the earth. Centuries drift by like clouds. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania, bound to Poland, becomes a vast commonwealth, a major power in its own right. Then, as empires clash, it is swallowed whole, partitioned and absorbed by the neighboring Russian Empire in the late 18th century. The name of Lithuania is wiped from the map of Europe. The state that was forged in 2 centuries of defiant war seems to have vanished forever. But an echo remains, a deep, resonant memory preserved in the language, the folklore, and the landscape itself. You are now in the 19th century. A new kind of resistance is stirring. It is a battle not of swords, but of words, songs, and ideas. As the Russian czars try to erase Lithuanian identity through policies of Russification, a national revival takes root. Lithuanian poets, historians, and activists look back to the past for inspiration, and they find it in the forgotten archives of the medieval Grand Duchy. The great dukes are reborn as national heroes. Vytautas the Great becomes a symbol of Lithuania's golden age, a testament to its strength and its imperial reach. His father, the noble Kęstutis, is held up as the ultimate patriot, the selfless pagan guardian of the homeland. The Battle of Grunwald is transformed from a medieval clash into a foundational myth of national pride and resilience. The forest, too, remembers its ancient role. In the turbulent 20th century, you see this legacy reawaken in its most visceral form. You are with the Miško broliai, the Forest Brothers, the thousands of Lithuanian partisans who fought a desperate, doomed guerrilla war against the Soviet occupation after World War II. They melt into the same dense woodlands and treacherous swamps that sheltered their ancestors from the Teutonic Knights. They use the same hit-and-run tactics, the same intimate knowledge of the terrain to fight a modern superpower. It turns out that hiding in a swamp and ambushing invaders is a timeless skill set in Lithuania. It was on the national curriculum for about 600 years. Even the old gods stir from their long slumber. As part of the modern search for a unique national identity, a movement to revive the pre-Christian faith emerges. Today, you can find adherents of Romuva, officially recognized as a religion, gathering around sacred fires on ancient hill forts, chanting the old songs and honoring Perkūnas and Žemina. It is a powerful testament to the endurance of a worldview that refused to be completely erased. Historians and cultural critics still argue whether this modern embrace of the medieval past is a genuine continuation of an unbroken national spirit, or a romantic reinvention, a modern nation-state selectively choosing symbols from a distant, complex history to suit its present-day needs. Perhaps it is both. You stand today in the heart of Vilnius, a modern, vibrant European capital. High above the city, on the hill where Gediminas dreamed his prophetic dream, a single brick tower stands, the last remnant of the great upper castle. It is the symbol of the city, the nation, and the iron wolf of the legend. The story of Lithuania is the story of the underdog who just refuses to read the script that says they're supposed to lose. It's a 700-year-long training montage. The fierce, stubborn, and resilient spirit that was forged in the fire of the Northern Crusades, that was defended by generations of warriors in their wooden hill forts, never truly died. It became the bedrock of the modern nation, an enduring echo in the deep, green forests. And so, our long journey through the forests of the past comes to a gentle close. The echoes of battle have faded, the clang of steel has softened into the whisper of the wind through the pines, and the great bonfires of the pagan dukes have dwindled to the soft, warm glow of embers in the hearth of history. The figures you have met tonight, the determined warrior, the shrewd diplomat, the defiant priestess, can now recede back into the mists of time, their stories told, their long watch finally over. Let the final images in your mind be of the deep and quiet woods at night, the moonlight filtering down through the immense canopy of the ancient trees, illuminating a path of soft, cool moss. There are no armies here now, no sound of horns or war cries, only the gentle and rhythmic breathing of a forest that has witnessed all of these stories and has kept all of its secrets. Allow the details of the narrative to drift and dissolve, leaving only a feeling of peace, a sense of a deep and enduring quiet that has finally settled over those once contested lands. The story is now a part of you, a whisper in the archives of your own memory, and you can let it rest, knowing the journey is complete. Let the quiet of the forest be your guide now, as you ease further into your own comfort, into your own rest, letting your thoughts become as slow and as peaceful as the river flowing silently through the heart of that ancient land.